So now you had 2 movies under your belt. Your third movie is with Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington in Crimson Tide. Like, how do you keep getting all these big movies on your early stage of acting?
Well, you know, you got to strike the iron when it's hot. I didn't know that, and I had a lot. I had great momentum going. I had great representation. I was represented by William Morris. My agent's name was Frank, Frattaroli, and then that was in New York. And then I had a guy, Geyer Kaczynski, in L.A. He used to represent. He was representing George Clooney at the same time. He was representing me. So I had top representation, and I have only myself to blame for squandering all that. Because, as you just said, how the hell do you get these 3 top-tier films under your belt so fast, right? There's actors that work a whole lifetime and don't get opportunities like that. And now here, this is coming to me without me really, I didn't really look for it. Not that I was opposed to it, obviously, because as soon as Bronx Tale, I was in there, and I wanted to, still want to do it for the rest of my life. But back then, I didn't. So the lack of appreciation is what was really my demise. You know what I mean? I didn't appreciate anything, and it just kept happening so fast that it was almost like I was entitled to have these things happen to me. And for that reason, and the fact that it's happened so fast, so soon, means that it's going to be here forever. So this movie that they're offering me, this big studio movie, I'm not going to take it because I want to hang out with my friends in the summer. It was crazy. It's crazy to think like that. Absolutely crazy. But you live and you learn. And maybe, we're never, I listened to this rabbi on Instagram. This guy's like a genius. But, sometimes we think things are not happening or our lives are in chaos. And what he said is, there's never chaos and things are never falling apart. They're always happening exactly the way they need to be happening for whatever reason. So now I look back and reflect and back in hindsight and say, maybe that's the way, our creator wanted that for me. Maybe he wanted it for me that way because then he knew that it would lead to destruction, but then the rise once again, like everything. Have you ever heard of the Chinese farmer? The Chinese farmer, it's basically life. You never know what's going to come from a good fortune or from a misfortune. You have this Chinese farmer, right? He's on his farm. He's got all these horses, right? So now, one of his horses runs away. One of his best horses runs away. So all the neighbors gather around and say, "Well, isn't that awful?" And he says, "Maybe." The next day, that horse that left comes back, and he brings 3 other valuable, great horses with him. So now all the neighbors once again gather around and say, "Well, isn't that great?" Maybe. Next day, his son, trying to tame one of the wild horses, gets thrown off the horse and breaks his leg. So now all the neighbors come around and say, "Well, isn't that awful?" And he says, "Maybe." Next day, conscription officers come around and they're recruiting kids for the army, but they reject him because he has a broken leg. So then all the neighbors gather around and say, "Well, isn't that great?" Maybe. But that's basically what it is. You never know what's going to come. You would thought, "Oh my God, I'm doomed. I broke my leg, da-da-da." But now just because of that, you may have saved yourself a trip to somewhere where you're going to get killed or potentially get killed. Not to say that's anything wrong with that, because if you live in a country, you should want to fight for it if you have to, right? So, but that's basically what it is. So now it's just like knowing that and having some wisdom that I've acquired. Nothing is really bad to me anymore because I know there's always something that's going to happen from it. If it goes this way, it's going to come back this way. And when it goes this way, it comes back this way. So that's the ebbs and flows, you know what I mean? And that's what life is. And sometimes when the misfortunes happen is when we learn the most and learn to navigate life in a much better way. You know what I mean? So that's just the way it is. We make the best of everything that comes our way.
Very true, very true. So for Crimson Tide, the role was a little bit smaller than what you had had like in A Bronx Tale. So how did you prepare for that role, that particular role?
I mean, there's real no preparation really, because I mean, I did a little. I mean, it's not like just going on your phone and all, just accessing. So it wasn't as easy back then. So I would literally go to a library, look at, like read some stuff on submarines and what a radio guy was and what their purpose and what their role was. And in Crimson Tide, the radio transmission had been cut off. So it literally fell all on me, even though it was a smaller role. But I'm basically stationary in my seat. XO radio, you know what I mean? It's not, but that film, I mean, it was some cast, right? Oh my God. Whew. I didn't even realize half of these guys were until later on. Like Viggo Mortensen was in there. Like, he played Weps. I mean, James Gandolfini was in there. I mean, I worked with all these guys, and it's like, oh my God, But Tony Scott, who directed Beverly Hills Cop, Top Gun, Days of Thunder, Man on Fire, his brother Ridley, Blade Runner, Alien, Gladiator. These guys are like some of the biggest films in the history of film. Tony directed Crimson Tide. So I remember, because Tony's in LA, so obviously I couldn't get in the room with him, but this was when they had the fax machine. So I remember they faxed me my lines, and my agent, Frank Frateroli, said, Tony Scott. Meanwhile, this guy's directed some of the biggest films, and to me, he's just some guy, Tony. I didn't know. I was just some ungrateful kid. That's what I was. An ungrateful, unappreciative kid. That's what I was. Because I should have known who that was. But he called me up, and he's a British guy, and he's sweet as pie, and no pressure. I made me feel comfortable. I was downstairs, my privacy, and I did a couple of lines, XO radio officer, and his reaction was ambiguous. Thank you. You got the part of thank you. That was great, but I think you're a little too young, or I think, it could have went either way. So I didn't really know. But then the next day, my agent called me. How did you do? I said, I think it went great, but I don't know. And he says, well, you got the part. So it did go great. So then I remember going to LA, meeting Tony Scott, and Tony was the man. He always had the torpedo, Monte Cristo cigar. He had the shorts with the pink hat. Yeah, no joke, Tony. Okay, man, yeah. Lillo. He used to get me nuts. I used to put the headset on, and I remember I used to tighten it so it would really press in my head, and I'd really feel that claustrophobia in that sub, and everything that was going on in there, spraying me with the Evian spritz to make me look like I'm sweating. And you got Tony Scott, and this submarine was built on a gimbal. So it's like remote control. It moves and it shakes like when we get hit. This guy, Al DeSaro, he was the special effects guy on Speed and like some big movies. So I definitely want to give Al DeSaro some credit, because he built that. He built that submarine. So now when I go there, I remember I didn't even know what Tony Scott looked like. I remember I walked on the set my first day, and I remember the submarine was like that. For whatever reason, you know what I mean? It had to be this way. And I remember, do you know what they put on the floor? You know what the floor was covered in? Coca-Cola. It was sticky, so then you could grip. All the floors, they had Coca-Cola, so then you wouldn't slip, yeah. And I remember, Tony Scott was like literally this guy with like grand camera equipment. He had forearms like this. This guy's like literally on the floor, like this guy was into it. It was just getting there and seeing what he was up to. Like, wow, this guy's dedicated, which means I got to be dedicated too. That guy was, Tony died, jumped off a bridge when he had inoperable brain cancer, but he also hired me for Enemy of the State with Will Smith. I love that guy, man. What a great guy he was. Working on that film, and I mean, he used to rev me up. Lillo, you're fucking mad, Lillo. Okay, in action, Lillo. And it was like, I was like almost like fumbling the thing. I couldn't even grab it. I was like so worked up. But it worked. Whatever he did, it worked.